Hello everyone. Just to let you know, I'm doing this presentation in my bedroom because at school I do not have a projector. I have one at home. So, I think it'd be easier just to do it here. I know it's a little blurry. I'm going to do my best to explain it. I'll also post the PowerPoint, obviously, so you can look through the slides as well. So yeah, I'll just be standing up here. I know this will be a little bit awkward, but I'll be walking up to the computer to change the slides since my remote does not work with the projector. But hello, everyone. For those that know me, I'm Dylan Georges. Today we're going to be talking about effective strategies for elementary physical education. I teach at McNabb Elementary. I teach K through 5. So I think in order to talk about effective strategies, it's best to talk about what I know best, which is physical education. So when we talk about effective instruction in terms of PE, obviously effective instruction has been shown that it relates or correlates best with student success. So obviously in any type of classroom, effective instruction is important. But in my opinion, it's even more important for physical education. Why? Because of the conditions in which physical education occurs. First, physical education teachers teach in an open environment. We teach outside with tons of distractions and dealing with different elements, including even things like sun and wind and weather. Outside of that, it being in an open environment, as a result of that, there's more stimuli to distract the students. So it's really important that a teacher demonstrates effective instructions to sort of take some of those conditions and limit their consequences. Outside of that, PE classes, a lot of them, they lack instruction time. So teachers have to be really efficient with what they teach. A typical physical education curriculum should be taught over 365 days, over the course of a school year. It's not 365, but, over 150, 180 days of school. And most physical education teachers, especially in Florida, only get to see their students maybe 40 to 50 times a year for 30 minutes. So there's obviously a lot of challenges involved with that. Furthermore, physical education, compared to other subjects, deals with all 3 domains of learning: cognitive, affective, social, emotional, relationship factors in education, as well as psychomotor. We deal with movement. A lot of our standards are performance-based. So that adds an extra element in what you're trying to teach. And then lastly is lack of importance. A lot of physical education teachers objectively, a lot of physical education curriculum or classes have to deal with the lack of importance, the time they're spent, the resources, the collaboration to discuss best practices. So it's really important that as a teacher you understand your effective instruction, that you have good effective instruction, because you're not going to have much support. A lot of times you have to be independent with what you do as well as what you research. So we're going to be talking about effective instruction, things that we can do in physical education. Specifically, we're talking about we're going to be talking about Marzano. So Robert Marzano, obviously a famed education policymaker as well as researcher. He has 10 categories of instruction that are broken into 3 subcategories: providing feedback, content strategies, and context. These are the important things that he thinks are important for effective instruction. Each one of these, we're going to be talking about how we can apply them to physical education, specifically elementary. So we're going to start off first talking about effective instruction for providing feedback. So Marzano talks about providing clear learning goals. So in physical education, he talks about students understand progression of knowledge of what they are expected to master. Students can self-identify where they are. So basically, students need to know, what are they learning for? What are they learning towards? So we have to have clear communication. We have to communicate with them what the goal is for the classes are. We have to use scales, rubrics. We have to track learning to the best that we can, and we have to celebrate their success. So for example, the example I gave and how you can do this is 3rd grade. One of our standards is ability to continuously jump a self-turn rope. The way you can provide communication to students is provide them with a rubric or a scale. You can grade yourself, self-assessment. How am I doing at achieving this standard? 0, I'm not able to swing the jump rope. All the way to 4, I can continuously jump a self-turn rope at least 5 times, performing a type of jump other than 2 feet. So it basically goes from 0 to 4. 0 means you're not able to come close to the standard. 4 meaning you not only meet the standard but can go above, sort of an enrichment opportunity for them to reach towards. 3 is usually the goal. So, and part of that is not only providing the rubric, but teaching them about the rubric. 3 is where you want to get to. That's meeting the standard. 4 is enrichment. 1 and 2 means that you need extra help and support. You need modifications. The next part about providing feedback is assessment. Now, assessment's a loaded word that a lot of people don't like to use, but at the end of the day, assessment, all it is basically we are going to quantify where you're at. We're going to grade where you're at. We're going to give you information as to where you are at. So that is what assessment is. In PE, extremely difficult. Why? 40 to 50 classes of PE a year. It's hard to assess because a lot of times you're not going to be getting a lot of valid data. For example, if I'm trying to consolidate, a standard into a unit. I'm trying to consolidate a unit. Usually, a unit you might have, let's say, continuously jump the self-turn rope, right? That might take in a normal PE class, 5 to 6 instructional days. Well, you don't have the time to do that. You only have 3 or 4 times to focus on a particular unit. Now, you can teach that throughout the year and practice that throughout the year, but in terms of assessment, if you want to concentrate on a specific learning target, it's very hard to condense it into 1 or 2 classes, 3 classes, and do the accurate pre-assessment, formative assessment, and post-assessment typical function. So as a teacher, you have to be really creative with how you assess. A lot of times, it's hard to obtain formal data, as I said, but you can use informal assessments all the time, all right? Tracking through observation, tracking through students self-assessing. Now, these are hard to attach grades for, but as an elementary physical education teacher, I'm less worried about grades, more worried about providing information for them, all right? So we can use, like I said, informal assessments through your periodic maybe unit assessments, and then potentially something that you could do would be a formative assessment, maybe that's cumulative at the end of the year, so that students have a true opportunity to advance their knowledge, advance their performance, so that they can actually receive a grade or assessment that is valid and reliable. Example I gave, 5th grade, muscular endurance versus muscular strength is one of our standards. How do we do this? How do I assess this? Is I use the fitness gram. So we use the fitness gram to assess their muscular strength and endurance. We then have discussions about differentiating between the two. I then use informal assessment based off of observation. So I do a class in which they have to demonstrate the difference between strength and endurance with how they would do a push-up. So they basically have to modify the push-up to their own ability for practicing strength and endurance. So I use the example even with myself. I'm a strong person. I can do a push-up, right? That is going to be an endurance test for me, where as opposed to if I wanted to make that same type of assessment into a strength test, I would have to modify that push-up into something like a diamond or a one-handed push-up where I'm really using max effort. And students have to do that and demonstrate that. And I don't do it formally. I have them perform it, and I sort of informally assess them as I walk around. You could formally assess them as like maybe at the end of the year as a cumulative thing, or at the end of the test by having them write it out. Unfortunately for PE, since it's performance-based, it's hard to assess, have them perform, and not have a student replicate that because there's no isolation. There's no folder to hide your work. I can't assess them one at a time in private. So since it's public, I usually use informal assessments or something that's written. So you could do a written assessment, or maybe they have to write out the difference between muscular endurance and muscular strength. And all this is not only providing feedback for the student to see where they're at, but most of the time providing feedback for the teacher, seeing where your students are at. The next part we're going to talk about after providing feedback is content. All right, we have to have appropriate content for effective instruction. So when we talk about content, we're talking about developing different types of lessons. The first lesson we're talking about is direct instruction. So as I said before, when new content is being presented, students understand which parts are important and how the parts fit together. So first, you have to make sure you're progressing, you're scaffolding. All right. As a teacher, you need to ask yourself, how I design and deliver direct instruction lesson plans that students understand which parts are important and how parts fit together. That's the question you ask yourself. What's important? How they fit together. Example: things that you can do. Ability to self-toss a variety of objects and catch them. That's one of the kindergartner's first grade standards. So what are the important parts about that standard? What do they need to understand? How do they get to reach that standard? So the clear communication first of the learning goal. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? When they're tossing their scarves, how are their hands going to be? What does it mean to be what does it mean to complete a scarf toss? How are they wanting to do it? What are the critical elements? So you need to provide cues, a poster board, for example, listing the specific parts, short, clear, concise, so that the students understand it, and then clear progressions. Progressions allow the students to break the lesson down into digestible parts, as well as it allows the students to progress from less advanced to more advanced. This way, you can informally assess to make sure that the students are on their correct track, as well as provide opportunities for students to see the progression of a modified activity to advance. So, for example, scarf tossing, you would start off, catching on different body parts, teaching them the correct way of flipping or tossing them up, and then you would advance to more things like cross tosses or two one-hand juggling, and then crisscross with 3 scarves. And you provide that clear progression so they understand what's important in the critical elements as well as the track they're supposed to be on. Next thing is when you're in these lessons, how do you practice and how do you deepen the lessons? All right. So we present the content. Then we have to understand, as a teacher, you have to sort of ask yourself, how do I structure the lessons in order to deepen their understanding? And one thing that I like to use a lot of is understanding similarities and differences between skills, especially physical education with the certain things that we do. A lot of things relate to one another. So with that going on, an example of that would be, let's say we're teaching 2nd grade, ability to throw a variety of objects in an overhand motion towards its intended direction. So how do we deepen their understanding of it? All right. So first, students demonstrate the critical elements and the performance cues. Students use and practice the skill using a variety of objects aiming at a bowling pin. So you have them use a variety of objects, all right? You teach them the critical elements. Excellent. Now how do we deepen it? All right, so they're practicing, now how do we deepen it? Higher level questioning at the end of it. All right, boys and girls, all right? What differences did you notice between throwing a beanbag, a large foam ball, and a rubber chicken? Maybe sort of push them in the direction of thinking about when you had to release it. Now the students are thinking about, okay, overhand throwing, I understand the critical elements, but what about the nuances of overhand throwing, all right? When I'm throwing a rubber chicken, for example, I have to release a little bit earlier as opposed to with a large foam ball. Because if I release late with the rubber chicken, it's going to end up going to the ground as opposed to a rubber ball. I want to make sure that I'm releasing towards the target. So those are the way you can deepen the lesson and deepen the standard. Next, what we're going to talk about is developing knowledge and application lessons. This is really important. A lot of what we learn, we need to apply it to the real world. All right. So after content has been presented, students generate and defend claims through knowledge application tasks. All right, using knowledge in an applicable way. This is the most important part. This is something that I think is really important that gets lost in PE. Right? You can have them do push-ups and run all day, whatever poor teaching, physical education teaching things you want to do, but it's not gonna teach them. Are they really learning it? Are they becoming more physically educated? Just because they have good fitness does not mean they're physically educated. So we have to develop and figure out how we can teach this knowledge in an applicable way. So for example, 5th grade, understanding the difference between muscular endurance and muscular strength. Let's go back to that. So the students know the difference now. Now how do they apply that to the real life? So you can do activities like a role play, all right? Students have demonstrated their understanding. Now they must become competitive long-distance swimmers and decide whether they should train for endurance or strength. So you can do a turn and talk. You can do a formal assessment where they have to write this stuff down. This gets them thinking about, okay, I know the difference between muscular endurance and muscular strength, but why is that appropriate? Why does that matter? Well, if you're a long distance swimmer, you have to know that because you're going to want to train for more endurance because of the type of exercise, the type of sport that you want to train for. So this is a way that we can apply what we're learning to a real life situation. Maybe then have them do it to their own stuff. All right, now you're role playing yourself. What type of fitness components in your activities or fitness activities that you like should you concentrate on? If you're a football player, you're going to want to concentrate more on strength, max effort. If you're a runner, you're going to want to concentrate on aerobic capacity. And these are ways they can apply their knowledge they're using to their own personal lives. So that's important for developing applicable ways so they can apply it to the real world. And then overall strategies for all types of lessons for the content. All right. So as I said before, PE is very challenging with the lack of instructional time. So we have to make sure that students are continually integrating new knowledge with old knowledge and revising their understanding. The problem with PE with that is, retention. You see them on a Monday, you don't see them till Friday. It's very hard to bring back to the knowledge they learned in the previous class and implement it into the new class. A lot of times we spend a lot of times it's like 3 steps forward and 2 steps back every time. You have to review and revise, but there still is a way. I like to think of, I use this sort of this progressional and being able to integrate the new knowledge with the old knowledge. I like to do this over the course of the year with things that I like to call my concentration standards, things that I focus on. For example, in 5th grade, we focus a lot on those health-related fitness components, and we use those throughout every single lesson. So we're able to build off of it because that's one of the things that we continually do every single lesson. So we build upon it, right? As I said before, start off with muscular endurance and strength. Now we can learn about different ways to train for it. Now we can learn about how we can apply it to ourselves. That's sort of the progression that you see throughout it. So things you can do, you can preview, demonstrate, verbalize skill before instruction. That's a mainstay. If you're teaching a skill, you need to have critical elements. And you need to be able to demonstrate it. Student demonstrations tend to be more effective because it relates to what the students are. Providing critical information, for example, 2 hands, swing, opposite step, go low and roll. Those are the critical elements for underhand rolling. All right. Reviewing content. All right. When given the cue, perform the critical elements. So we have to make sure that we review the content. Revising knowledge, reflecting on learning. One thing I use is a stoplight assessment. It's a scale. Students have to grade themselves 1 through 4 based off of the hula hoop they step in. Blue is enrichment 4. Then it goes green, yellow, red based off of how well they perform, and I give them criteria. For example, if we're doing underhand rolling, step in the blue if you were able to underhand roll accurately at your bowling pins and knock them down, 3 down, whatever, at least 5 times in the 4 minutes of learning. Or, green would be, were you able to underhand roll and at least hit one of the bowling pins? 2 would be, I was able to demonstrate proper bowling technique, but wasn't consistent in hitting the bowling pin. Sometimes I missed some. And 1 would be, I had trouble demonstrating underhand rolling and didn't really know what to do. And then 0 would be not being able to do it at all. Purposeful homework usually is in form. It's tough in PE to give them homework, but you can do things like, all right, boys and girls, next class meet, I want you to think about farmers markets. All right, add an element of nutrition to it. Where can you go in your community where there's a farmer at markets? Ask your parents. You can give formal assignments. From my experience, those are hard to do. Usually you don't get them back because of the duration between classes. A lot of times if you ask students, hey, your homework for tonight is to find somewhere in the community where you can play ultimate frisbee, usually they'll go home and they'll come back to class and they'll be able to discuss it. All right. So those are sort of strategies that we can use in all PE lessons. Now, going on to engagement. This is really hard in physical education. Students need to be paying attention, intrigued, energized, and motivated. Now, some people might be like, oh, physical education, all kids love going to physical education. That's true. Kids do love going to physical education. But a lot of times, depends on your classes. I think a lot of times students, if you're an extremely good teacher, yes, you can be rigorous in your teaching strategies and provide a fun opportunity and fun games. That's what I try to do, but sometimes it's hard. And a lot of people, they try to make PE fun as opposed to actually educational. So from an engagement standpoint, I always find it hard because first, attention's tough with the outdoor environment, and being able to motivate students, especially students that, a student might come in that isn't the most physically fit, motivate students to perform activities where in a lot of physical education you're performing in front of other students. So there's definitely a nuance with how you motivate and how you get students to do things. The strategies you can do to engage them, obviously, is to observe. Students are not being engaged. You need to provide increased response rate or you need to provide feedback to that student. Response rates, getting more students to respond. That means you're the way you are choosing students for answers, or you're doing a lot of whole class responses. For example, with my younger students, I always do, boys and girls, I present a question. I want you to think about it, and then in 10 seconds, I want you to answer it in 3, 2, 1. And then you observe to see students and see what they say. Turning talks are another great way to increase the response base. You can walk around and hear what the students are saying. You want to make sure that all students are talking, right? If a student's not talking or they're not communicating with you about the knowledge, then how do you know if they've learned it? Present unusual information. For example, with my soccer, when we use soccer balls, the first thing I introduce with use them, I talk about the original soccer balls and how they were actually made out of a pig's bladder, and that the reason why we call people that don't pass the ball hogs is because pig's bladder, pig, hog, ball hog, don't pass it. So they take that information, they go, oh, I never knew that, and it sort of engages them, gathers their interest. And then academic games. Listen, PE is academic games. That's what we play. If you're not using academic games in physical education, then you're not probably teaching physical education in a way that is going to interest the students. So motivational strategies, Dean, Hubble, Pittler, Stone talk about this. Reinforce effort and provide recognition, especially in physical education class. We need to make sure that students that are trying, that's the most important part, right? If students are giving their effort and they're understanding it and they're being recognized for their successes relative to their performance and their ability level, that's going to increase their motivation, right? That's going to either, you want, especially with a lot of students, they don't have a lot of self-efficacy towards their body, towards their fitness. So we need to figure out ways to motivate them and recognize when they do well. It says intrinsic motivation, task value, understand the importance of the task, provide challenges for the task. Intrinsic motivation, every time you're talking with students, you always want to reflect that this is about helping your health. Why is it important to have your health? Live long, and you provide all the benefits of being healthy and physically fit, and working together and having this knowledge. So that the goal is for them to be motivated from internal feeling. I want to be physically active. I want to be physically educated because I know it helps myself out. It's going to make me a better person. It's going to make me healthier. That's the goal. I don't want my students to be performing things because they have a certain reinforcer, some tangible reinforcer at the end. I want them to work hard. I want them to strive to be the best and most physically fit they can be because they understand the importance of it. So always relate to the importance of it. Always get back to that. And I think that's a good way to get engagement. Rules and procedures, right? So we're talking about a little bit about the context. Physical education, management. You're dealing with psychomotor. You're dealing with the psychomotor domain. You're dealing with students that are moving around. You need to be efficient in your transitions. I think a lot of PE teachers, one of the reasons why they lack success is because they don't have clear and concise rules and procedures, and they don't reinforce those procedures. They're not consistent with how they implement those rules and procedures. So students have to understand, that's one thing. Students have to understand it, make them clear, concise, short. Have general rules for the class, rules for certain games. Review those rules every single time. If a student is misbehaving, let's say a student is asked to be a partner with another one, and they go, I go, Johnny, be a PE number 2. I have 4 rules. They're called the B's of PE. One of them is be kind. I'll be like, be a PE, be kind, all right? Choose kindness in the situation, Johnny. So I reinforce their behavior. I correct that behavior. I give them corrective feedback by reference back to my rules. That way, it's cyclical, and it's reinforcing to the student, oh, I have to do this because it's part of the rules. It's another way to help them remember them. And the procedures, what to do, how to behave, and things like that. Signals for attention. I always use Iceman, hands on my knees, eyes on me. And if students don't do it, boom, corrective feedback for them. Students that are doing it well, immediately, boom, corrective feedback for them. Reinforce those behaviors that you want to see. All right. So it says before, establish specific rules and behaviors, organize the physical layout, use a lot of cones, set boundaries, use cones on top of the boundaries, especially with the younger students, as well as have your equipment organized. Use hula hoops to put equipment in, separate them, color code them, make it easier for the students to understand, make it easier for the students to identify what they need to do. Positive and negative reinforcement system, obviously for certain behaviors, have some type of point system. For me, it's 3 points and you go to the treasure box. So students, if I think they go above and beyond in terms of, for me, the point system for me is about, I use it more for less of performance based, more of behavior based in terms of students helping one another out. So if a student goes out of his way to help a student and provide corrective feedback for another student, in my mind that'd be something like, oh, you know what, Johnny, that was awesome. Love the way that you saw your partner was stepping with their wrong foot and you taught them how to step with their opposite foot. For me, that's reinforcing. That's higher level logic for them, but it's about helping out your students, right? That we are a team, that in order for the team to succeed, everyone needs to be competent at the skills and their knowledge. So, and I usually charge my students that are high level with some of those tasks. And then also rewarding students that, that struggle but show improvement or show good behavior. Negative reinforcement system, obviously, one system I use with my class, usually it's a verbal warning, maybe a second verbal warning. Then it's a 1 minute timeout where I have them called walk the line with the walk around the PE court, the boundaries one time. It takes about a minute, 2 minutes, like a little timeout, and they have to observe the other students having fun. So by the time they get back, they understand that, or they're excited to get back into the activity and they see what they've been missing. So it usually helps future negative behavior decrease. Chance, as I said before, my fault. So another thing we need to be that is about providing rules and procedures is what do you want? How do you want the students to behave in every situation? And one thing we do at McNabb is we have what's called chance: conversation, help, activity, movement, and participation. So for each activity, if you can, or at least maybe something that you use a lot. For example, I use a lot of warm-up games. I have something called Four Corners. It's basically students get into different groups, heterogeneous groups. But when they do that, I always provide, all right, boys and girls, during this activity, your conversation will be helping other students out. Now they know what they're supposed to be conversing about. If you need help, to ask other students or myself if you cannot find help, so now they know who to ask for help. The activity, I give them the task they're going to perform. Their movement, well, that's usually part of the task is the goal and then how to get that goal. And usually in PE, it's about movement. And then participation. I want everyone participating. I want, if we're doing groups where there's different roles, I want each person assigned a role and make sure you're participating within your role. That way students have clarity on how they're supposed to behave. All right, so providing context. And then last but not least, maybe the most important, is relationships, especially with students that you have difficulty teaching with, right? You have to figure out, you have to learn about these students. What drives them? What interests them? How do they respond to different tones of your voice? How do they respond to certain situations, right? You can be proactive in stopping a lot of things in class. Let's say behavior. I'm just thinking of behavior right now. You can stop a lot of behavior problems by being proactive. You notice Johnny and Jimmy, right, are both very competitive people, and they're in an activity, and you can sense sort of the competitiveness getting out. You can intervene. You can talk then about with those students about being competitive but demonstrating respect at the same time. So it's understanding the relationship so that you can intervene at the appropriate time. But overall, the idea of motivation and relationships is that you want students to feel welcome, accepted, and valued. All right? Get to know them. Smile when you see them. Value their work. All right? That's why I say some of the students that maybe if they don't have great behavior, or their performances or their skill level or their knowledge level is not reaching the standard, you still have to figure out a way that whatever they're doing is being valued. And this is really important in team games too, so that everyone feels that their value is part of it. So that means creating games where everyone has individual parts so that they are valued through it, or if everyone has the same part, then teaching the students about valuing others and valuing others' type of participation. So it says use verbal and nonverbal behaviors for affection, right? Big smiles, sympathetic. A lot of times too, you don't want students to um, be intimidated by you or not be approachable. So if you see, let's say, a student that is not on task, right? Something that you can do, nonverbal behavior, you just simply walk behind them. You might make eye contact with them and look at them. You might twist their head. You might put a straight face on. Let them know that what they're doing is inappropriate without calling them out and embarrassing them. And you get the same result without the student feeling embarrassed or maybe not maybe diminishing that relationship between you and your student. By understanding students' backgrounds and interests, they demonstrate objectivity and control. So objectivity, you have to make sure you're being fair to all the students, that if a student is not following a rule or is not on task at a certain part, that you are doing that for every single student, that you're showing value for every single student, that you're positively reinforcing students when they deserve that reinforcement. And then control. Right? Students get that sense of control. As a PE teacher, especially we're outside all day, it's hot, you're raising your voice, you still need to demonstrate control. All right? That's why for me, one thing I've learned is I am very regimented in how I approach students and provide feedback, especially dealing, with control, dealing with things that frustrate me, right? If it starts to drizzle a little bit, my first year's teaching, I might start freaking out and yelling at kids, yada yada yada. Or if a student was misbehaving, a couple times, I would get off of my behavior system and I would just, start flipping out. And control actually works better. All right. So, like for example, if a student is misbehaving, give them that verbal warning. Be calm about it. Johnny, remember the task is for you to be working on your overhand throw at the target. Please make sure you're behind the line. That's your first one. Control. Do this, Johnny. Right? You're demonstrating control of what you're supposed to do. And then as that progresses, then you go on your next. All right, Johnny, I asked you to do that before. You have not done it. Please walk the line. If they complain, Johnny, I'm sorry. Those were the rules. I gave you your first warning. You did not. You did not change your behavior. You do not have to demonstrate your timeout. So demonstrating control as opposed to a reaction of the students. All right. That also will help save you in terms of your burnout as a teacher. PE can be very stressful. And then another one, this is our last one, is maintaining high standards. All right. A lot of times with PE, I think one of the reasons that it's difficult to maintain high standards is that lack of instructional time. It's very hard for students to meet the standards, but you still need to hold them up to those standards. They're there. That's what they need to know. It's not nothing you can do about the number of times you see someone in PE. All right, no amount of instructional time you have. So you have to keep these students at a high standard. If the standard says they need to understand the difference between muscular endurance and muscular strength, you've got to figure out a way in your class to do that. And that means students too that might have low fitness levels or no skill level or low proficiency level at physical education, you have to make sure that they're still trying to reach those standards, right? A lot of PE teachers, the class one is, I get them active and moving. Cool, great, you get them active and moving, congratulations. I can go find a dude on the street right now that can keep kids active and moving. Give them a bunch of balls, tell them to go make a game, and they'll be active and moving. That's not the point. These students need to be reaching standards. They need to be able to be physically educated out of it. And so it's important that your standards, for me, the best advice I ever get was, whatever if you had they told me to say, Dylan, you ever have a son or a daughter, what would you want them to know by the time they leave 5th grade for physical education? So that's my standard, my child. What would I want my child to know by the time they leave 5th grade? All right, it's the highest possible standard you can make. And that's how you have to treat it. So that's why it motivates not only the teacher to keep it rigorous, your teaching rigorous and your curriculum rigorous, but also motivates the students to reach to higher goals. Right? If you set the standard low for students, they're going to reach that standard, even if you provide enrichment opportunities. All right? You want to set the standard high for the students so that they are at their appropriate levels of physical fitness. And a way you can do that is, as I said before, setting the standard high with your goals and your targets, setting your standard high for behavior, being consistent. Consistency is the toughest thing, but it's the most important thing. Consistent with your standard for behavior, for performance, for engagement, throughout the entire lesson and throughout your entire curriculum. So you can do things like asking in-depth questions of reluctant learners, provide more frequent questions, as I said before. Just because Johnny or Jimmy, you know those students have a tough time in your class, doesn't mean you call on them, doesn't mean you neglect them, doesn't mean you focus on other students that you think might have a chance of reaching the standards. No, you are responsible for Johnny and Jimmy as well. So you need to figure out ways that you can incorporate them in the class so they can still reach those high standards that you set. All right? So yes, finding reluctant learners and still aiding them with those standards. Every child in your class or every student in your class needs to be treated as if they were your own. So these are Marzano's 10 categories of instructions. We talked about them. Providing clear learning goals, assessment, direct instruction, strategies, practicing and deepening lessons, knowledge application, strategies for all lessons, and then making sure that students are engaged, they understand the rules and procedures, you have strong relationships, and you communicate high expectations. All of these are very tough to perform physical education, but it doesn't mean that they're unattainable. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to do them. I think what happens a lot of times is, realistically, it's hard to have students reach standards. It's hard to have students demonstrate the learning that you hope them for. Some of it is, I'm sure, as you know, some of it is pedagogy, how your teacher can be, but some of it is things that are out of your control. The most important part is understand as a physical education teacher, there's going to be a lot of things you cannot control. It does not create an excuse for you. You still have to have that mindset of, I have 40, 50 classes to teach these students what they need to learn. And you have to be creative with what you do to do that. You have to be efficient with your instructions. You have to make sure that you're consistent in all classes, that the material you're using is appropriate and engaging. But it's possible, even with my students. Are they at the level I want them to be at? No. Will they ever get there? I have no idea. But I tell you this, I aim every year, I reassess how I do, I reassess my curriculum, and I find changes. And every year I make tweaks, not only to my pedagogy, but also to my curriculum and the instruction that I do, as a way of, I think this is the best way of learning it. And I've also had to find creative ways to teach those concentrations that I talked about earlier. Whatever you think is important, whatever students you think are most important. For me, those are the ones that reflect health and wellness, right? Are these things going to be applicable for students throughout the rest of their lives? So anything related to the health and wellness standards that we have, those are mostly cognitive. I focus on those. So those are things that I do in my warm-up every day. My warm-up is pretty consistent. It's those four corners groups. Students get into groups, and they perform different tasks with their groups or a different activity against other team members of those groups. But it's always reflective of a health and wellness concept, all the way from K through 5th. It starts off simple. For example, let's say I wanted to teach cardiovascular endurance. With the K-1s, I'd do activities with them, warm-up activity where they reflect on their heart and what happens to their heart during different activities or the tasks. Second and third, I might have them check their heart rate and talk about specifically how their heart rate goes up. Talk about the process of why your heart rate goes up. And then fourth and fifth would be, how is this applicable? All right, well, if you're fourth and fifth grader, or if you're going to be in middle school and you want to lose a little weight, you want to do activities that accelerate your heart rate, that get more, that need, do activities where your muscles need more oxygen, because that's going to allow you to get more energy out of your body. More energy out of your body means you're going to be burning things like fat, and that's how they can transfer that knowledge of just basic what your heart is, all the way to using that knowledge in an applicable way. And I do that all through just my warm-up, and there's many different things that we can do. So as a physical education teacher, just to summarize, we need to make sure we're consistent. We need to make sure that we make no excuses for each other, no matter what the situation is. But as I said before, I believe that it is completely possible and plausible for a physical education teacher to still provide an adequate, competent, and if you're really good at proficient physical education experience for your students. Thank you for joining me. I hope this all worked. I hope you got something out of it. Was to educate you a little bit more on some of the mindsets of maybe physical education teachers in your district, so you can talk to them about some of the things that we did. Thank you. Have a good night.